Okay, now please join me in welcoming Mel Quickmiller with Harrison County, a local agency that has that true champion of preservation. So, well, let's welcome Mel.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. As Travis said, my name is Mel Quickmiller. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Harrison County Highway, so I am one of the locals, if you will. It was funny, earlier they were considering the DOTs local. No offense to any of the DOTs, but, you know, when we talk about locals, we're talking about the county people, so we're talking about us ourselves. I'm going to talk to you about our bridge preservation program, and I'm going to tell you a little story if you choose to listen. So, we often talk about change, and sometimes when we talk about change, it really just boils down to, are you willing to take a chance? So for us and for our story, here's kind of how this change/chance happened. In 2018, I was promoted to the assistant superintendent, and what that entailed for me is I received a sign crew, I received a brush crew, and I received a bridge crew. The sign and the brush crew are tales for another time that I'll talk to you about later if you want to talk to me. I come from a background of communications and theater. And believe you me, if you know me, you'll learn about my theater background a lot. My question was, I'm not an engineer, nor do I play one on TV. So I didn't really know anything about bridges. And I was like, I don't know nothing about no stinking bridges. Right? So my story started with, how do I learn about bridges? How do I learn about these assets that I have received? Well, I'm going to tell you that if you don't already know, you have these lovely partners with you, and they're called LTAP, those local technical assistant programs, and those people are wonderful. Our LTAP guy is actually here today. He's going to moderate this next session, Pat Connor, and I think that Greg had spoke about him a little bit as well. But I told Pat about my lovely dilemma, if you will, and he said, well, Mel, I got a solution for you. He said, here's what we're going to do. He said, I'm going to take you, and how would you like to go to Florida? And I said, yes, please. And so he took me down to Florida on a scholarship, which we have another local here that's on a scholarship as well. So Pat is really willing to help us out. And he said, I'm going to take you to this program, and I'm going to let you learn about bridges. I'm going to let you learn about some of those things. And what the great thing about this is that you get to see it, touch it, feel it. And I'm one of those kind of people. I like to see it, touch it, and feel it. So I got this great day on the second day, which was actually Tuesday at that time, and they take you out in the parking lot and they set up all of these demos, right? And they show you that, hey, this is this. And I loved that because I got to see and I got to touch and I got to feel some things that honestly, as a local and as a person that doesn't come from that type of a background, I got some terminology under my belt. I got some things that I wouldn't have. People that drive on our roads, it's funny because we talked about this in one of the other presentations. They look at the aesthetics, right? They don't understand that there are things that are going on underneath those bridges, above those bridges, whether it's just a smooth or a bumpy ride. So I was able to do that, and as you can see, these are just some of the slides, and I was just showing you some of the things that I actually got to see and experience and put my hands on during that time. Another one of the things that I was learning, or the way that I was learning is, again, and I think that Greg had mentioned this too, is that we have a bridge conference. We've actually turned this down now into an asset conference. And so I was able to go there, and we actually have, it's at Purdue University, and they have a Bright Center, and they actually have old bridges there, and they have failed for one reason or another. So you can go around and you can do a self-guided tour, and you can actually learn about some of the reasons why those bridges have failed, or some of the things that are going on with those. Again, terminology for me, things that I was going to learn, and things that I needed to learn. But at the beginning, that age-old question is, how do you begin, right? Well, begin, right? But that was really easy. So here's what I had to do. I had my boss, and Kevin is a great engineer, and I said, hey, Kevin, can we talk? And he said, well, sure. I said, I'm not sure what I need to do. And he said, well, Mel, he said, one of the things that I think that you need to do that would be very helpful for you is to try to learn about some of the components of the bridge. What is an abutment? What is a pier? Now, I know that a lot of you are going, duh. But for those of us that have never done this or haven't done that for a living, these were terms that, and I'm teaching my guys now. I actually have 2 new bridge crew members. Our old ones have actually went away. One retired and one had to leave for medical reasons. So I'm teaching these guys, and they come from a construction background, but these are elements that they don't necessarily know about. So I had to go through that same process. I had to learn those things. Another tool for me that I wasn't using that Kevin handed me was our lovely bridge inspection report, which is that huge big book that some of us get and blow the dust off of it every now and then, right? We get those every 2 years, right? That's a wealth of knowledge. There's a lot that you can learn in that draft copy or that copy of that bridge program, right? So what I learned was some bridge basics. Some of the things that we weren't doing. We weren't deck cleaning. We weren't looking at our seals and our joints. We weren't looking at our vegetation, the guardrails, the signage, just load postings. We just talked about that. So all of that stuff, all of that put together in that lovely bridge book that I was given, I came up with what I called the list. Now, the list for me was, believe it or not, it was like 263 items. So I took and I know a consultant could have done this for me, but I'm one of those that I like to check things off, right? I like to check the box off. So I made an Excel sheet, and I had put on there 263 items. Then I handed it to my bridge crew, and I said, here you go. And they said, well, what do you want me to do with this? I said, well, you see these things that I think that you might be able to handle? I want you to start handling them. And I want you to give me a date when you're handling them. And so every week we would have a meeting, and we would talk about that. But what they would tell me is they'd always be like, it's too big. And I said, well, how do you eat an elephant? And they go, I know, Mel, 1 bite at a time, right? That's right. That's how you eat an elephant, 1 bite at a time. And so that's what we would do. We took the bridge list and we dummied it down 1 bite at a time. Another resource, and what I'm doing is just using things that I had available to me. So another resource that I had was my team. And I love this quote. So resources include your team, the team that you build, whether they be positive or negative. There's little difference in people, but that little difference makes a big difference. The little difference is attitude. The big difference is whether it is positive or negative. And Greg talked about champions, and I think he talked about culture. And a lot of that is just about your attitude and about passion. We heard about passion earlier today, and you've got to be able to get out there and be willing to make that happen. So I always talk about your team. You want to get people that are willing. And I know, I'm old, believe it or not. Mr. T is one of my favorites. So he pities the fool who doesn't have A players, right? Because we've got to have a good team. Now, speaking of teams, the reason that I had Mr. T up there was because this is my team, and this is the old team. And the gentleman in the middle we'll talk about a little bit later, but he is also a resource, or he can be used as a resource. But these 2 guys, and I do have permission to use this picture, by the way, because they're funny. But this is my team. So I have a big whopping team of 2. So how do you use 2 people when you're talking about assets that might take more than 2 people to do a project? Well, I think we've heard a little bit about that today. Sometimes you have to use contractors. Sometimes you have to use other resources available. But what can that team of 2 do? One of the things that we did was when I was asked to go or was allowed to go to Florida, and I said yes, was I actually, and this is where Tim comes in, I met Tim Woolery from Advanced Chemical, and I was told by Pat that, Mel, one of the things you're going to do is you're going to have a demo with Tim, and he's going to bring out some product for you, and you're going to demo a bridge deck. And I was like, okay, what are we going to do with this? And he goes, well, you're going to seal the bridge. So this is Tom, and this is with the day that we were out there, and this is what we were doing. We were demoing the bridge. I didn't know it at the time, but it was the start of our bridge sealing program. So another tool that you have, or a tool in your toolbox that we don't often use, and it's these conferences are perfect for this, is that your contractors and your vendors, right? Go out there and make friends. I think it was Chris that said, try to talk to at least 10 people today, or make 10 new friends, right? So make 10 new friends, because those people are willing to help you. And no offense to any of our vendors out there, but they want to sell you stuff. So negotiate with them. Hey, I'd love to see that product. Why don't you bring it out and let me see it, right? So if you do that, then there are things that and maybe it'll work for you and maybe it won't, but at least you've started a relationship with those people, right? This is just an example of one of the bridge replacements. This was another example of a tool that I used. We have contractors, we have local guys that do our work for us. So there's a bunch of pictures in here, but we went out there and we just watched them place the beams. And that was a really big deal. I'd never seen beams being brought on a truck and the crane. And I know it sounds silly, but sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And until you get into that or until you experience that, then you don't know actually how to deal or handle with it. Another thing we did was we did some deck patching. So we had another local contractor, and he allowed us to come out, and he let us watch that whole process. As a matter of fact, he actually let me chain the deck. I'd never done that before. That's really cool. Has anybody chained a deck here before? Right? So to me, I was like, oh, it's like finding a stud in the wall. I thought that was so exciting, because it makes a different noise. I was like, oh, there's a little D, and there's a D-lam, right? And he's like, yes, Mel, there's a D-lam. Another thing that we did was we watched the seal replacement on one of our bridges. So again, this is another process that these are just things that some of our local contractors were doing for us that I had never seen or I had never experienced. But we took the time to make a connection with those people and to ask them if we could watch this process. And in that exchange, they even allowed us to do some of the things. My guys got in there. They were actually, one of them is down there with the flamethrower. He loves that. He loved that. He wanted to heat up the tar and to remove it. So he got to do that. So that was helpful because, again, can you do this with two people? A process like this took 10, there were 10 guys on the field doing this out in the field, not including your flaggers. So that was something that I was like, well, this may not be possible for us to do. This is another thing. We did a full depth replacement. That was another example. So we're talking about preservation today, right? That's a big deal for us. So one of the things that we did in one of our trainings was LTAP had the definition of preservation. So I'm just going to read this. And I know that we talked about what the definition was and that we were going to hammer it out. Well, for us, that was preservation is the act of keeping an object safe from injury, harm, or destruction. Or preservation would involve minimizing the destructive effects of environment and traffic by regular or intermittent timely application of remedial treatment to the components of the highway infrastructure. Well, that works perfectly for me with a bridge. So then we talk about culture. So now we have to move from not only knowing what we're doing and getting our staff involved with that, but from that culture of preservation. So we want to create that culture, right? We have to talk about it. We have to champion it. We have to promote it. So culture eats strategy for breakfast all day long. My boss loves that expression. So where did we start with that? Yes, I know that our consultants are doing bridge inspections for us every 2 years, and that's wonderful, and that created that lovely list that I started to check off. But I needed my guys to touch it, see it, feel it. So how do they do that? Well, they have to take that book, or they have to become willing to get in and get underneath and get around and get out. So they did. Another tool we used our consultants, and actually the gentleman sitting down on the beam underneath there, he is actually our consultant, and the other two below are my team at the time, and they're just out there asking questions. It's like I said today at lunch. I wanted to be able to go out there and I wanted to see what they were seeing, or ask them when they're looking at something, why did you look at this? Why was this an issue? Why was this a problem? Not just because it had an obvious crack in it, or it had an obvious D-lam in it, or it had an obvious defect in it. What was it that was making you, as the bridge inspector, look at this? And so we go out with our bridge inspectors every cycle we have. And our cycle's coming up this August, and we will be out with them. This is just some of the examples that we have seen in Indiana on some of our local bridges. We're very rural. We have a lot of farmers. Our farmers love to attach their barbed wire to our fences. They love to have cattle fencing so that their animals don't get in trouble. But the problem is they attach that to the bottom of our bridges. So we have to go out and have nice little conversations with them, or sometimes not so nice conversations, and say, look, you're destroying our bridge, our asset, Yes, it might be on your property, but you don't own the bridge. So we've had to do some of those things. Again, seeing holes, that's obvious. That's an obvious defect, but a hole this big and then a hole this big, right? And in 2 years, a hole this big can go to a hole this big. So that's another reason why we wanted to go from, instead of just every 2 years, to that year. This is some of our erosion issues that we noticed and some of the things that we were doing in order to try to get some of that taken care of. So we don't have a lot of scour problems, but we did have a lot of erosion. We have taken, and what my guys have done is, God love them, they were very, very good. Some of our equipment is not, we have some minis and we don't have a lot of large equipment. We couldn't always put the equipment where it needed to be as far as actually putting riprap or helping with the erosion. My guys would hand haul it. And so that is a testament of the culture that we have tried to build there. So I would say, yes, Virginia, you will need to become one of the trolls under the bridge. And my guys have embraced that fully. They are very good about the inspection process. And if I have time, I'm going to show you one of the forms. I'm trying to go through this quickly so that we get to where we need to be. Here's some of the other things that we've noticed. Of course, here's a large crack. There's some rebar showing through here. These are some of the things that we were trying to look at and some of those things that we are trying to fix and become more cyclical, right? So starting that whole preservation, that culture. This was before, so bridge cleaning. We did not wash our bridges, plain and simple. We didn't do it. And when I had my first demonstration with Tim, one of the first things you have to do is you have to wash your bridge deck. Wow, what a difference that makes. And I think someone said earlier, the more you wash them, the easier it gets. It's 100% true, right? This is one of our steel truss bridges. I just love this bridge. This bridge, we have a flood usually in April, May, for whatever reason. We usually wind up having some really heavy rains. And for whatever reason, this, as you can see, we had I know this is too much information, but we actually had a deer carcass in here during this cleaning. I did not remove that. I made the guys do that. I'm not going to lie. But that is me up there. I try to do what I ask them to do. I try to do that as well. I think that's a good philosophy. Don't be willing to not do anything if you're not if you want to tell somebody to do it, you better be willing to do it. So we went out and we borrowed the snooper because we don't have a snooper and we don't have access to a snooper. So during our inspection period, and we write this in the contract now, we ask our consultant if for the day we can actually use the snooper. It takes us a half of a day, and so they will give us a driver. We run the snooper ourselves, but we will get in there and we will clean it. And I can tell you, this is the first year that we did this. It took us every bit of that whole half a day. We just did it in 2020, and it took us probably 2 hours. It was because there wasn't as much residue, there wasn't as much buildup. So again, if you're doing this all the time, right, that's the whole point of preservation. 2018, until now, this is what we've learned and what we've started to do. We're starting to do some sweeping and cleaning of our bridges. And because of the lovely deck sealing program that we're on, we're doing that. We are actually washing all of ours, and I say all of ours. I only have 89 bridges, so I know that a lot of you have a lot more to handle than I do, but I also have just a team of 2. So we do wash all of our bridges annually. Now, Guardrail. This was one thing that our guys weren't willing to tackle for whatever reason. Now, there are limitations on what you can and cannot do. There's some guardrail that I won't allow them to touch just because we want to make sure that we're doing it in a proper way. But in replacements, we can do those sorts of things. We can take it at where it is jointed and then just replace that. So this is an example of that. So this was the before. This is the after. Now, I'll tell you, one of the things that this did for our guys was this gave them a sense of accomplishment, allowing them to go out there and to actually do something. And as someone said earlier, to own it. So they owned that. And so now we've got them, and they'll come to me and they'll go, hey, this piece of guardrail is bent or broken. And I'll be like, okay, well, can we fix it? And if they think that we can fix it, then we will attempt. And if not, then we'll get a vendor involved. And this is something that we had to include in our inspection. So this is another part of that process that we started looking at. in here I tell you that we had to look at the nuts and the bolts. I don't know for whatever reason, but in southern Indiana, the bolts and the nuts would mysteriously disappear. So we had to make sure that, and not that they weren't not only tightened, but that they were all there. So we do that on an annual basis. I know that sounds weird, but that's what we do. Deck sealing. So we are now on our 3rd year of sealing. This year will be our 4th year of sealing bridge decks, and that was all because of, actually that's all because of Tim and his companies and his willingness to come out there and demo silane and to show us how to do it and what to do, and that it was cost effective for us and that we could, as a local, we could afford it. And so this is just an example, and again, I'm out there doing it. Our guys they're even doing the wing walls. Anything that they think they can spray, they're spraying now. So we love it. This was the start of the program. So this was, again, I think we picked the hottest day in southern Indiana to go out and demo. And we asked some of our friends and neighbors to come out and to just watch the process with us and to meet Tim and to talk to Tim. And so we do this now regularly. So we are on a 5-year rotation. And I keep buying product. The first year I started out, I bought 1 barrel. Second year, I bought 2 barrels. In 2020, I bought 3. I think I bought 4 this year. Did I buy 4, Tim? I think I bought 4. So we're actually scheduled to probably get done a little early, but that's okay, because guess what? It's secular now, and it's in our budget, so I'm just going to keep on doing it, right? And again, that's part of preservation. Vegetation control, I know people don't think about this, but guess what? I know that they say it's not easy being green, but it's not easy being brown either, right? And a lot of time vegetation is something that can harm or not help the life of our bridges, right? I said, hey guys, guess what? You get a new present. You get a weed eater for Christmas. And they took those weed eaters, and we are actually, we are also in the process of getting our herbicide and pesticide. They call it a pesticide license, but it's actually for you to be able to handle chemicals. We're in the process, as the municipality is actually going through that whole process so that we can become agents and have our actual crews use that stuff so that we can do that on a regular basis. And that's what preservation is, doing something on a regular basis, not just once in a while when you get your hand slapped for it, but on a regular basis. Here's another thing that we did. Canopy. Canopy was a big deal. We have our area. We have a lot of hills and valleys. Our topography, it's beautiful to look at, right? But the leaves and all of that good stuff. As a matter of fact, this is one of my favorite pictures. So the trees had been there so long that they had grown into the wires, so that's what we left. But this is what it looked like afterwards. So we have noticed now that these things, these little things, and these are little things. We're not talking about replacing a bridge. These are little things that any agency with one person can do. If you have a one-man crew, they can do this. We've worked with our bridge, our brush, and our sign crew, and we're doing, that's the herbicide program that I was telling you. And we're actually doing that on a larger scale, trying to get the pesticide certification. So erosion control, here's another thing that we were doing. Again, this is what we're looking at. No, these are a lot of pictures jumbled up, but let me tell you what we just did here. We took this, our bridge crew identified 4 bridges that were in need of major erosion control. We met with property owners, and we got what was called a right-of-way or a right of entry, and basically that's just a one-page document. We meet with the owner, and we ask them if we have the ability to get on their property for whatever reason. We're going to do this, this, and this, and then we're going to make sure that we do not, for whatever reason, destroy anything that we damage, we will put back or replace better than. We scheduled the equipment and the labor, and then we worked with our district foremen, and we were able to do that. Worked out really nice. So what do we see in our future as far as Harrison County? And for any of you, what should you see in your future? Well, you should see bridges. And what I mean by that is that you need to be seeing your bridges. We talk a lot here about proactive versus reactive, right? So one of the other things that I did, and again, I know that my consultant could have done this for me, but it just helps us put our hands on it. We created a local living, breathing bridge inspection form. And so we kind of took it off of the PASER rating. So we do excellent, good, fair, poor is our system. So I have the guys go out every year. They look at every asset that we have, our bridges, and then they rate them. And they rate the specific. They rate the deck. They rate the underneath. They look at the scour, if there's any scour. They look at the piers. They look at the abutments. They look at the wings. They look at the joints. So they look at those things, and they rate them. Then they come back with me. We have a meeting, and they'll tell me, I think this is bad, I think this is bad, and I think this is bad on this. Then I take it to my engineer because I ask him to, I say, what is our priority on that? So we're still doing that. One of our contractors, actually Jacoby Tombs and Lands, they had saw me do this presentation, and they actually asked to have a meeting with me, and it really makes me happy to hear people talk about the element, because they wanted us to take it more to the elemental type of inspection, and they told me it was really easy for me to do that, and they're going to help me, assist me do that. So that's just one more step that we're going to take it a little further. Very excited about that. Some of our projects, these are some of the things that we did. Really what I learned was trial and error. I had to try things. Some things worked, some things didn't. I think that with any preservation program, I think that through some of these talks today, people have said what has worked, what hasn't worked. You have to find what works for your county, for your state, for your agency, and go from there. So with that, I'm going to leave you so that we can get on a break, right? Thank you so much for your time.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.